because what you, the unsung heroes in the wastewater industry, do matters. Every Wednesday, join me, Suzanne Chin Taylor, the DooDoo Diva, a longtime veteran of the wastewater, trenchless, and civil infrastructure industry, as I interview guests who are making an impact on how we manage and operate systems for conveying and treating wastewater. I'll also be speaking with representatives of organizations that are utilizing disruptive or new technologies, and executives who are going to share how to be successful and sustainable in our vital industry. So whether you want to learn about the latest trends in technology in treatment or trenchless, gain tips on training and retaining great talent, or simply how to be more efficient, productive, or profitable, this podcast is for you. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the DooDoo Divas Smells Like Money podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of visiting with TJ Suter, president of Hydro Products, a longtime entrepreneur and the inventor of the Vanguard Pathogen Defense System. Hopefully I got that right, TJ. So thank you and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Susan. It's certainly my pleasure to be here and talk with you on your podcast today.
All right. Well, before we jump in, you and I were having a little conversation, and you made the comment about the effluent and the makeup of what is in our sewer system, or with wastewater collection systems today. You kind of labeled it that this isn't your grandfather's sewage. And so, what did you actually mean by that?
Well, back in the early days, when we had modern plumbing systems in the United States, you had all kinds of different world scenarios. First of all, you had smaller cities and towns that were closer to the actual treatment plant. You had some of these old clay tile pipes that would leak tons and tons of groundwater and I into the water stream and would dilute it. You'd also have very high volume flush toilets, usually around 8 gallons per minute, et cetera, and a lot less international travel and tourism to the United States. So, what I meant by it's not your grandfather's sewage is nowadays, especially with the Clean Water Act that was enacted in the late 70s. They took out all the phosphates, sulfates, heavy metals that used to kill a lot of the bacteria that was in wastewater. But then on top of that, you have urban sprawl. You have houses and apartment buildings, further and further from the wastewater treatment plant. So there's longer and longer times that these effluents can intermix and share resistant genes with one another. But also you have lots more international travel coming in. Even if we killed everything in the United States and had a perfectly clean wastewater system, which is highly unlikely, but if that was the case, it's 24 hours, you're going to have somebody coming in from another country using the facilities and getting it in there. In addition, you have less I&I inflow and infiltration, for those of you who don't know what that is. And so you'll have slip lining, you'll have new PVC pipes and grouting and so forth that put less and less groundwater into the wastewater streams. So you have thicker and thicker sludge, than you did before. And also the toilets, we have now no flush or low flush and even no flush toilets. You probably haven't been into a men's restroom anytime soon, Susan, but, in like the airports, if you have, I won't say anything, but.
No reason, no.
But anyway, like at the airports, they'll have the urinals that are literally no flush. So you're really having concentrated amounts of, human waste in areas, and so you're having more and more concentrated bacterias into these strains that our wastewater workers are having to deal with. So that's kind of what I meant by that statement.
So in comparison to what we had to deal with before for workers, what are some of the new dangers that are popping up because the consistency and the makeup of what is in the sludge?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question.
What are some of those dangers are?
Well, there's a lot of different, dangers. I mean, when you consider, that every hospital and hospice, veterinary clinic, even morgues, they dump their blood down, these sewer systems, and it's not illegal. That's perfectly acceptable. But when you consider all of these paths for bacteria and viruses and funguses, et cetera, to get into it, you're dealing with stuff, we're still, having an increased levels of community-acquired MRSA, which is methyl-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and you have C. diff, and then you have of course the big COVID situation. Now we're hearing more and more about that, but that's not the most serious, in my opinion. The most serious is what they call CRE, which stands for Carbapenem resistant Enterobacter ACA. Thank God they abbreviate it CRE, so I don't have to say that all the time. But these are strains of bacteria that are so strong that there's really not any antibiotics left on the shelves to help combat them should you acquire one in your body. And wastewater workers are right at the forefront of health and safety, in my opinion, and so they're being exposed to these things every day.
Wow. Okay. So with that, what would you recommend, or what do you see as being needed to safeguard personnel, on a procedural level, as well as technologies that might be available to help them or protect them from these heightened risks that they're now being exposed to?
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan, because really, if you look at the NIOSH's hierarchy of safety, you'll see, an upside down triangle, and on the bottom of that triangle is PPE. And then you go on up to, different ones, and all the way at the top is removing the risk, completely. So you're not even, if it was a table saw you were dealing with, well, you take the blade off, but, if on the bottom of the, that same one, if it was a table saw, it would be, hey, wear some safety glasses. So in the wastewater industry, personal protective equipment, which is, your glasses and, hopefully a face shield, gloves, boots, these types of things. But really that's, the first line of safety in any business for the wastewater. I've been in wastewater business for over 30 years. And so I know that, from my own experience of working on these trucks and dealing with the human waste, you're always, first of all, you're tearing, the gloves a lot of times, or you're taking them off improperly. But also you have stuff that gets splashed on you. So the very minimal is making sure to have on your gloves. And I'm not talking just leather gloves because they get saturated. There's a couple of ways you have penetration and permeation. So penetration, is because, you tear a glove or whatnot. But permeation is where it comes in on a molecular level. So on, a very porous leather glove, well, it might help keep your hands from getting cut on, something, it might be stuck on the sewer jet hose, for instance, like a piece of glass. Well, it's very porous. So once those gloves get sopped up with wastewater, it's going to go right into your skin. And then the other one is the, just the, very thin vinyl or latex or nitrile gloves that are so popular to be able to keep, some of the solvents. And, that's a whole nother animal that I just, reminded myself of. You have more and more of this nanotechnology that's coming out, and that's becoming really a problem. And that's on the drinking side too, because the membranes can't, filter out some of these tiny particles that people are being exposed to. But what I had, come up with, about 11 years ago, due to, my, I volunteered at a hospice for a 3-year period and saw all of these dangerous pathogens that, people had. And every once in a while, we would have a patient in there. Normally it was, they were dying of cancer or Lou Gehrig's or something that wasn't transmissible. But every once in a while, we would go in and you'd find a great big sign, and even red bags on the door, and just to really make you aware, and says caution, use extreme caution, unknown virus or sickness. So, we would go in and do the direct patient care. The doctors and nurses would come in and, administer medicines and so forth. But literally every single thing in that room was red bagged and incinerated right on site, whether it was a tissue box or bed sheets or a gown or a tooth swab, anything. But that same waste was just dumped right down into the sewer system where, my guys were working about 150 feet out into the street. And I said, you know what, I want to build something in. And that's how I had come up with the Vanguard system. So the Vanguard system is a collar system, and it snaps onto that hose, that jet hose, prior to it coming out. And we keep the, pathogens right in the waste stream where they belong. So they're not, coming up to the workers.
This Vanguard system, that was a nice, that one that leads me to just segue into this, because I was doing a little reading on this and thought this was really interesting, and wondering to myself, why doesn't, not that we want this to be an advertorial podcast, but looking at it and going, why doesn't every combination truck or jetter truck have one of these on here? Because it was relatively low cost, but just thinking about what we've just been discussing about the dangers and all these new things, how does it actually work? You were saying that it keeps it in there, but it gets deployed onto the actual hose reel itself.
Yes. Yeah. So what it is, Susan, is it's really a two-part system. So it's attached to any combo or jet or even CCTV truck, anybody that's being exposed to wastewater. And what it does is, on the jet side of things, you simply jet out to your destination manhole, and prior to coming back, you just simply pull the machine out of the collar holster that's right at the front or the rear of the vehicle, just depending on where the operator station is, snap it on in literally less than 5 seconds, and you turn it on right at the operator station. And what happens is, once you turn on the system, you're spraying some high pressure water and a broad spectrum antimicrobial, a small amount of it, into our spray collar. So the collar itself is an aluminum collar that snaps together and has 360-degree coverage on the hose that's coming through the inside of it. So you're spraying it from all sides, and you're keeping all of that waste, just stripping it off and keeping it into the manhole, and so it can go to treatment. But it's not just for germs. We really got our start on germs because that was what it was primarily built for. But, as a wastewater worker, you run into so much more stuff, the grease and grit and grime and mud, crud, and blood, as we call it. So you're able to strip a lot of this stuff off and keep it in the manhole so it can go to treatment where it belongs, rather than coming up and being on the hose or dripping off the hose onto the street. And the other thing is, when you have an easement and that manhole's not right in the center of the street currently, what happens is the guys string out the jet hose into somebody's yard, and they'll pull that hose back, and it just drips, on people's yards and the sidewalk and everything as it's getting to, paid back onto the hose reel. Well, with the system, we have not only the direct collar that's mounted right on the front or the rear of the vehicle, but we also have a 50-foot hose or 100-foot hose. The city of Houston has 100-footers, and because they have a little bit further easement. So you can literally take the collar off, snap it onto that hose, which would have the handgun to wash off your boots and shoes and SSOs, and you can attach the collar to that. So next time you're in an easement, you're able to snap that on, at the point of exit of that hose, and spray it off and keep it in the manhole where it belongs. So that's kind of the way it works in a nutshell.
Well, you brought up a great point, that even if they didn't have a system like yours, that some steps should be taken as they're bringing that hose back. They probably don't even think about that. Maybe some operators do, but some may not, especially if they have a big quota to meet that day for cleaning or jetting. That hose and coming up, not only are they putting themselves at risk, but any place where that hose is touching.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, dragging that across someone's lawn. Right.
Yep. That's exactly right. I mean, I think it's like any industry. You get used to doing it. And, I also have a pipeline inspection business. And, if your house, got a backup in your house, and all of a sudden all your belongings and your furniture and your kid's kindergarten paper, that is now married and have kids of their own, gets soaked in sewage. It's a very sad event.
Yeah.
But, as a pipe inspection company, we see that, fairly regularly in a lot of different scenarios. And I always tell myself, listen, TJ, pretend this is your house. How are you going to feel? So you go in and say, man, I am so sorry for this damage. We're going to do everything we can to make this as quick and painless and get you to recovery as quick as we possibly can. Because I know it's frustrating, rather than saying, hey, all right, move, we got to do our job and get out of there. And, kind of, being callous towards it, just because you do it all the time. But I think that's the same with wastewater, workers maybe not washing their hands as often as they should, or, touching stuff that they shouldn't have, like your cell phone. You're doing a job and your phone rings and you lift it up with that dirty glove. I'll call you right back and put it back in. Well, they're not thinking about it. Or, smoking or drinking, a big gulp on the job, or wiping sweat off their face. I mean, any number of things. So I think it's just a matter of being cognizant of what you're dealing with.
Right. Creating an awareness. Because you had mentioned something to me, and I'd never heard this before, the term, the sewer flu.
Okay.
And yeah. I don't know, maybe other people haven't heard of this as well. And you were talking about when somebody new comes on a job and they don't feel well, in that first month, and nobody quite knows why.
Right.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because, really what this is coming down to is there's health risks and there's implications for not changing our attitude towards what we are dealing with, what these workers are handling.
Right.
They can't help but handle it. It's their job. But by just shifting your attitude, and we were saying earlier that perception of what you're dealing with to meet the current conditions, it can be the matter between life and death. So tell me, explain a little bit, what is sewer flu?
Well, sewer flu is, something that, waste operators or wastewater maintenance workers, call it when you have a newbie that's coming onto the job. And anybody that's been in the industry for any length of time, municipal or owning their own business, knows a lot about this, because you'll have some new guys come on and, they're, looking over the manhole when you're jetting out, or touching stuff, and just really acquiring stuff and having your body kind of get accustomed to it. So the sewer flu is really, a common term that's used in the wastewater industry of people that are new on the job and they contract stuff that, maybe gives them diarrhea, headache, some fatigue, things like this, for the first, couple weeks, month, or even 2 months into their job. And then their body kind of begins to build some resistance to some of these, more prevalent strains of, perhaps viruses or bacteria that are in wastewater. So nothing, horribly life-threatening typically in those situations, but it does tell me one thing. It tells me they're contracting something. Okay, they're contracting something, and I think a lot of it about kind of like the shingles, and they say, hey, if you have, if you've ever had chicken pox, you have the shingles virus within you right now. And it might not come out for 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years, but it's in there, and it's just waiting for that opportune time when your resistance in your body is really kind of at a tipping point, or it's compromised in some way, maybe with some type of an antibiotic, or you're sick with something else. I mean, my wife, is, middle age, and she got shingles recently. My mom, on the other hand, she's in her upper 80s and she got shingles. Knock on wood, I haven't had it yet, but, as they say, it's in me and it's waiting. So I really put this back on the same stuff that's coming out of sewage now, is people, I guarantee you mark my words, and when you're watching this video in 10 or 20 years, you're going to see, wow, they were contracting things that we didn't really know about at the time, but now they're rearing their ugly head a decade later, 20 years later, etc. And, so what we're trying to do is be proactive and keep them safer earlier. One, really interesting thing is if you get MRSA, it used to be you get MRSA and they say, yeah, well, you probably, went and saw your grandma, she was in the nursing home and you probably contracted it there. Well, I'm starting to find more and more pockets of MRSA among wastewater workers throughout the United States when I go and visit them. And one thing I want to mention before I get off that topic is if you get MRSA once, you are literally colonized, and now you're 6 times more likely to catch it a second time. And it can be very, very, very serious because there's some treatments for MRSA, but if it gets into your internal organs, then you could have a very, very serious life risk problem.
Just not aware of that. That brings up, a lot of communities, and I keep hearing this as a common issue, that the silver tsunami of all of these workers that are retiring out, they're aging out, and it's the problem of recruiting. Wow. And retaining and training new people to come up through the ranks, for contractors as well as, municipal wastewater operators. And so, this comes back to what can we, as people in the industry, what can municipalities do? What can contractors do to, keep, just being aware? Is it important that, you don't want to scare a potential new employee about what they're going to be exposed to, but at the same time, you have to be transparent,
right,
so that they can be aware and protect themselves as well as you protecting them. What would you be as a wrap up on this subject? Because it is very serious. Safety is very, very serious. That it goes beyond the gas monitors and the harnesses and the confined space entry. We're talking about little itty bitty things that you can't even see without a microscope that can get in and kill you, put a world of hurt, and it can even spread through your whole family. So what would you recommend that, for this new wave of new employees coming in, what do we need to make them aware of to establish good best practices to keep this new workforce healthy?
Right. Well, I think it really comes down to a lot to training, proper training, because let's face it, wastewater is not a real pleasant thing to deal with, yet it's a very, very necessary thing to deal with. They are on the front line of safety and health, in my opinion, because, even OSHA knows that, because if you have a SSO, an overflow, then, that's a big deal. And it's a very expensive deal for agencies when they do have overflows, because they can get fined because, the EPA and OSHA and the World Health Organization, everybody knows there's tons of viruses and pathogens and, bacteria in that waste, effluent, and, they want to help protect the public. But, the silver tsunami, I'm one of them. I've got another, probably 10, 15 years. I love what I do, so I'll probably work later than that. But, I think that really the guys that are coming in at the very beginning of this, if you give them, a sense of respect, okay, and a sense of safety of some point, that, hey, we're doing everything we can to help keep you safe and well and clean and get you home at the end of the day just as healthy as you came in to work that day. Because when you're dealing with, these jet hoses, and you can have a brand new jet truck, and honestly, it doesn't matter the brand, okay? All of them have the same product on them as they're coming out of that hole, all right? Yeah, it's
don't want to
pretty
think
nasty.
about that, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Some are worse than others, but some of them aren't too bad. In all honesty, you might have people doing their laundry in a day, and it gives it some a little bit fresher scent. But other ones can be just downright disgusting. But the bottom line is, if you can help assure these guys that you're doing everything you can to protect their safety and health, then they're more likely to stay in that chain so that they can grow and get into the next level of the food group or the chain up to management. And pretty soon they're going to get all the way up. But now a lot of these guys are not really being, particularly well paid, for their jobs. Some of them are, others are not. It's like anything. But if you are unsatisfied, underpaid in your opinion, you come home smelling like poo at the end of the day, every single day, and your wife or husband or whoever is saying, yeah, don't come near me, don't touch the kids, don't put it in the laundry. Well, if they come home a little bit cleaner, a little bit happier, a little bit more dignified, then they're probably more likely to stay and then move on up to the next level. So that's one of the reasons, and also the legal aspect, because I don't know if you have these legal commercials like we have in Denver, but I'll tell you, it's like every other TV commercials, an attorney wanting to sue somebody for a car wreck or a bad medicine or any number of things. And, and really part of what the Vanguard is really being received for right now is, hey, we're providing the latest level of protection for our team members, because if somebody gets sick, God forbid that they get very sick or hospitalized, and they see one of these commercials saying, hey, has your employer protected you as well as they could have? If not, you're due for a settlement. And they can be quite, large settlements. And I've ran into a number of those guys, during my course of time, out in the field dealing with people. They'll come up to me later and say, yeah, we had so-and-so, he's out on lifetime disability. He was 26 years old. And, you're talking millions of dollars for that, incident. So lots going on out there in our business.
Well, TJ, I want to thank you for sharing all this information with me today. It's a lot for us to think about. This isn't exactly a fun subject to talk about, but it's a very necessary subject for us to have at top of mind, to protect those that are on the front line in our industry that we rely on for our own health and safety. Everybody takes for granted that, everything's fine when they flush the toilet, and that, it's always going to be there and I don't have to worry about anything. But there is someone behind the scenes that is taking care of that to keep you safe. And so, we need to safeguard those people who are on the front lines. And so thank you for bringing all this educational information to light. And I know you and I could talk about different subjects, being old sewer dogs here, all the way back from when did we first meet? Back in probably the early 2000s, when you were my customer when I was at Pearpoint. I'd love to have you back on the show, or maybe even, continue this conversation and make a second episode out of it. So
I'd love to.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on the show today, and stay tuned for next week's episode. If you like this, put a comment out on Facebook, share it with your friends, subscribe. We have a newsletter, and look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, keep it flowing. For those of you interested in learning more about TJ Suter's company, Hydro Products, and its line of safety products for our industry, visit them online at www.hydro-products.com. TJ is also active on LinkedIn and welcomes connections from other professionals in the industry, and is available to answer questions about safety and making life better for your crews. Thanks for joining me, the DooDoo Diva, on this week's episode of Smells Like Money. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or simply tell a friend about the show, because that would help us out a lot too. If you're an industry expert and would like to be considered as a guest for the show, email guest@smellslikemoneymedia.com. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the topics you'd like to talk about, and we'll be in touch. For more information about our family of marketing, international business development, and workforce training companies dedicated to the empowerment and education of our industry, call us at 760-217-8010, or email me at raven@creativeraven.com. Until next week, a big shout out to all my industry friends and those who will be. You're my superheroes.